Today, we're looking at, well, a giant of history, Catherine the Great.
A huge figure, absolutely.
And maybe one of the most misunderstood. Before we get into her reign, her actual achievements, we sort of have to talk about the popular image, the scandal.
Ah, yes. The horse myth, you mean? That incredibly persistent, nasty rumor.
Exactly that.
And Robert Massie, in his biography, Catherine the Great, Portrait of a Woman, which is our main source today, he just completely dismisses it, calls it out for what it is, character assassination.
Right. Often sexualized, designed to, well, drag her down.
Precisely, to diminish what she actually did.
So our goal here is to get past all that gossip. We're using Massie's work, which is incredibly detailed, almost novelistic, to understand the real woman, her politics, her culture.
And also why her legacy is, frankly, really controversial, even toxic today, especially if you look at somewhere like Ukraine.
Definitely. And Massie's approach is important here, isn't it? He won a Pulitzer for Peter the Great, Catherine's predecessor's ancestor.
Right.
And he writes about Catherine almost like, well, like an admirer, a friend even. He defends her against what he calls scurrilous attacks. He's definitely an advocate.
He is. He wants her judged on her merits, her strengths, her achievements, not the folklore.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Her rise to power. Because honestly, it was completely improbable. She wasn't born into this.
Not at all. She started as Sophie Friedrich August von Anhalt-Zerbst, a German girl, daughter of a minor prince, basically a nobody on the European stage.
How did she even get to Russia?
Ambition. Mostly her mother's, it seems. Empress Elizabeth of Russia was looking for a wife for her nephew and heir, Peter. Sophie fit the bill, politically speaking.
Then she was just a teenager.
14. Brought to this massive, opulent Russian court, had to convert to Russian Orthodoxy, got renamed Catherine Yekaterina Alexeyevna. A huge upheaval.
Massie really paints a picture of that court, doesn't he? The incredible wealth, endless parties.
Yes, constant balls, masquerades, but underneath.
Intense boredom, apparently, and fear. Political maneuvering everywhere, especially under Empress Elizabeth, who was quite jealous and controlling.
Yeah, it sounds incredibly stressful. Massie shows Catherine as this really smart, headstrong young woman, just stuck in this environment, knowing her future depended entirely on this one guy.
Her husband, Peter, the heir, and that marriage, famously awful.
Awful is putting it mildly. Massie portrays Peter as, well, childish, immature, cruel even, intellectually, not all there. A half-wit is the term used.
There's that detail about the marriage itself. It wasn't consummated for years.
At least 9 years, according to Massie. This complete lack of physical or emotional connection is pretty central to how Massie explains Catherine's later choices.
Like taking lovers.
Exactly. It frames it almost as a necessity, given the political marriage was a personal void. He suggests 3 of her children were likely fathered by her lovers, not Peter.
And this personal disaster bleeds into the political, right? Peter finally becomes Tsar Peter III.
And his reign is a total catastrophe. Lasts only 6 months. He makes one wildly unpopular decision after another. Alienates the military, the church, the nobility, everyone.
You mentioned Peter's idolization of Frederick the Great earlier. That plays a role here too, doesn't it?
It does, in a bizarre way. Massie highlights this. Frederick the Great of Prussia was already a legend. Peter admired him so much that when Russia was actually winning against Prussia in the 7 Years' War, Peter pulls Russia out of the war, gives back territory. It was seen as completely nuts, borderline treasonous by the Russian elite.
Saved Frederick, apparently.
Pretty much. Massie notes it likely saved Frederick from destruction. But for Peter, it just cemented his image as unfit to rule. It showed his terrible judgment.
And created the opening for Catherine. The coup. 1762, she's 33.
And she doesn't just wait for it to happen, she leads it. This is the defining moment.
That's on a uniform.
Yes, a Russian colonel's uniform. Gets on a horse, rides out to the regiments, rallies something like 14,000 soldiers herself. It's this incredibly bold, physical act.
A very calculated display of Russianness too, right? For a foreign-born princess.
Absolutely calculated. It worked.
Yeah.
It won over the guards, the military, the populace. They arrest Peter, who dies shortly after in mysterious circumstances, and she takes the throne, not as empress consort, but as empress regnant. Batyushka, they called her little mother of Russia.
An incredible story. And what followed was this incredibly long reign, 34 years, often called Russia's golden age.
Right. And it's defined by this interesting tension. She's an autocrat, absolutely, but she's also deeply influenced by the Enlightenment ideas sweeping across Europe.
So what did that look like in practice? Her reforms?
Yeah, she had huge intellectual ambitions. She actually started rewriting the entire Russian legal code herself, a massive undertaking.
Did she finish it?
No, it was too vast, but the intent was there. She also famously abolished the use of torture in the justice system and restricted capital punishment. Big moves for the time.
And she was talking to the big thinkers in France.
Oh, yeah. Lengthy correspondences with Voltaire. Diderot. She bought Diderot's library when he needed money. She really cultivated this image of the philosopher on the throne.
But Massie also shows the limits, right? Like her attempt to create a kind of parliament, the nakaz.
The Legislative Commission, yeah.
No.
She drafted this document, the nakaz, or instruction, full of Enlightenment principles for delegates from across the empire to discuss.
But it didn't really lead to fundamental change. Why not?
It mostly failed, yeah. Because translating those ideals into Russian reality was hard. The nobility wasn't interested in reforms that might threaten their power, especially regarding serfdom.
Ah, the serfs, the vast majority of the population.
Exactly. And Catherine, for all her ideals, was pragmatic. She needed the nobility's support. They put her on the throne after all. So the nakaz showed her vision, but its failure showed the limits of trying to be an enlightened autocrat in 18th century Russia.
Still, even with those limits, her impact was huge. We mentioned the military expansion, getting access to the Black Sea.
Crucial for Russia's power. Expanded the Navy significantly, but also culturally. St. Petersburg really became this glittering European capital under her.
The Hermitage Museum.
That was her. Started as her personal collection in the Winter Palace. She amassed thousands of paintings. She really put Russia on the cultural map.
And public health, too. I was surprised by that.
Yes, a real pioneer there. Set up hospitals, medical schools, even orphanages across the empire. She herself promoted inoculation against smallpox, which was incredibly brave and forward-thinking then.
So a massive list of achievements. But let's touch on that critique of Massie's book, that it focuses maybe too much on her personal life, her lovers, the royal favorites.
That is a common point, yeah. Some reviewers felt that because Massie calls it a portrait of a woman, he leans heavily into the relationships, the court drama.
And maybe less on the nitty-gritty of policy.
Economics, diplomacy. Right. One reviewer famously asked something like, after reading this, why is she so great after all? You get the grand sweep, but maybe not the deep dive into the mechanics of her rule sometimes.
Which might explain why some of her foreign policy looks less enlightened. The partition of Poland, for instance.
Exactly. Massie covers it and makes the geopolitics interesting. But there's no hiding that Russia, Prussia, and Austria basically carved up and destroyed an independent nation.
Not exactly Voltaire approved.
Not really, no. It's raw imperial power politics. A reminder that idealism often took a backseat to the demands of empire.
And there's another interesting critique related to the focus on relationships, that Catherine's own character sort of disappears once she becomes empress.
That's a fascinating point from one of the reviews Massie cites, yeah. It's like, once she has absolute power, we see her reactions to people and events, but maybe less of her inner life, her own developing personality.
Maybe the role consumes the person. The empress overshadows Catherine.
Perhaps. It's an intriguing thought. And speaking of the realities of the time, Massie constantly reminds us just how dangerous life was, the lack of medicine.
Oh, that point was stark. People just getting a fever and dying in days. Even the powerful.
Yeah, it underscores the fragility of everything. The political world, personal life, it was all built on this incredibly precarious foundation.
Yeah.
You could lose everything, including your life, very suddenly.
Which feels like a sharp turn, but brings us right up to today. Her legacy. Because while the world might know her as Catherine the Great,
in Ukraine, for many, she's seen very differently, as a tyrant, actually.
Why that stark difference? What's the Ukrainian perspective based on?
It's rooted in her actions towards what was then the Hetmanate, the semi-autonomous Cossack state in Ukraine. Her reign saw its autonomy completely crushed.
They had their own self-governance. Military.
Broadly, yes. Catherine systematically dismantled all of that, absorbed the territory fully into the Russian Empire, imposed serfdom where it hadn't fully existed, and aggressively colonized the south, what became known as Novorossiya.
Novorossiya, that term is significant now.
Hugely significant.
Okay.
Because Vladimir Putin has explicitly revived that 18th century term and Catherine's legacy to justify Russia's modern claims on southern and eastern Ukraine.
So her imperial expansion is being used literally as a blueprint for invasion today.
Directly. The narrative is these lands were always Russian, brought into the empire by Catherine, and modern Russia is just reclaiming them. It connects her actions directly to the current war.
And this changes everything for how Ukrainians view her, especially in a city like Odesa.
Absolutely. Odesa was founded during her reign on territory conquered from the Ottomans. Historically, it was probably Ukraine's most Russophile city.
So the statue of her there, put up in 2007, that wasn't controversial then.
Not nearly as much as you'd think. It was seen by many in Odesa as a symbol of the city's founding, its imperial history, its connection to Russia, a source of local pride even.
But the full-scale invasion in 2022 changed that.
Completely shattered it. When the history associated with that statue is being used to justify bombing your city, well, suddenly that pride turns toxic.
People realized the connection.
Very clearly. The veneration of Catherine became inseparable from the aggression being committed in her name, using her imperial project as justification.
So what happened to the statue?
There was a public vote. Overwhelming sentiment shifted. And in late 2022, the city authorities finally took it down. Before that, it was covered up, fenced off, wrapped in this kind of undignified shroud of black plastic, as one report put it.
A very visible symbol.
Of Odesa turning away from that imperial past, trying to embrace a different European future, rejecting the myth.
So we're left with this really powerful tension, aren't we? You read Massie's book, this compelling portrait of a woman, smart, ambitious, overcoming odds, reforming, building.
A figure of undeniable historical weight and achievement, yes.
But that very same portrait, that legacy of greatness, is now directly fueling conflict and being actively rejected as a symbol of oppression. Her statue literally gets covered up and removed because of modern geopolitics.
It forces you to confront how historical narratives work, how they're used, and how they can change meaning entirely based on the present.
So the final thought maybe is, what happens to historical greatness when the context that built the myth turns poisonous? When the literary portrait clashes so violently with lived reality?
Does the portrait endure? Or does the reality force us to repaint it entirely?
Something to think about. History's never really over, is it? It's always being re-argued, reinterpreted.
Always.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Catherine the Great, a figure whose life and legacy continue to shape our world in profound ways. We'll catch you next time.